Welcome to Learn the Sword. A lot of times when we deal with different swords, what is the best sword? How does one feel? How do you decipher one from another? An Iaito compared to a Shinken, for example. Well, there are lots of different avenues to pursue. But there's a couple of things I'd like you to know, and the basics are a good sword is nice and tight, and a cheaper sword is loose and rattly. That's just the way it is. So when you hear the old term, they rattle the sabers, those don't sound like really good engineered swords. It sounds like something just to put the blade into. The Japanese took it 10 times more the other way. They made sure that perfection in the saya or the sheath went with that particular blade, so when you drew it, it didn't make a noise. When you drew it, it didn't give away your thoughts and intentions if you were to have an opponent that you didn't want them to know you're drawing the sword. Lots of different aspects, but here's what I want you to look at. Let's look over here at this sword here. This is basically what I call a beater sword because it's easy to draw, it's easy to sheath, and it's easy to manipulate. And if I take it, and it doesn't have a sage on it, but if I even shake it, hear that? I'm rattling my saber. Nevertheless, when we draw it, it's pretty good. And when we bring it in, but hear the slap. It's really slappy and it's really noisy. And when I pull it out, hear it pull out. Hear all that movement. Well, that's just telling me that this is a production-made model that they made in the thousands and they just slapped them together. Doesn't mean it's a bad sword. It just means if it was a car, you'd be getting the $6,000 car instead of the $16,000 car, and you'd get roll-up windows instead of, electrical windows. Or you get an automatic transmission compared to a manual. So that's how I want you to look at it. Now, when you start going up in price with different swords, you're gonna start seeing a little bit different quality, and this is what I want you to look for. The difficult problem arises is that when you do this all online, you can't feel the sword. You can't hear this online. That's why if you usually purchase a firearm, you usually end up going to a gun store so you can feel the equipment, and if it fills your hand correctly, you might purchase it. Unless you had one before and you can get it online, which they don't let you do anyway more. So what I like to do is pull the sword out. Now, when you pull the sword out of the sheath and it's not in your belt, you don't pull it this way or pull it that way. You lift the saya above your hand, above your head like this, and then you lift the saya off and hold the blade here. This is just the correct way of holding a sword when it's not in your belt and sheathing it, because if I sheathed it down here or down there, it might be dangerous for a different person. Remember, if you're shooting a firearm and I'm shooting downstream and I'm hitting the target, I hit really well and I turn over to someone on the other line and I go, "Did you see me shoot that?" Same thing as me pulling the sword down incorrectly. No one likes it. So nevertheless, when you have the sword by yourself, either in a seiza position or standing up, lift the sword up and bring it down on this way. Now, back to sorting. If I take the sword and bring it over here, and I pull out one that is more expensive. Now, this is a Shinken, this is a steel sword. The price difference is the difference between a couple of $100 and a few $1,000s. So there's a big difference in this. Sort of like driving an old beat up car from a foreign country that shoots out smoke compared to a new Mercedes or a used Mercedes. Nevertheless, you can see the quality. Now, let me shake this sword. Doesn't make a noise. Let me pull out the sword. It makes a little bit of rattle when I move it back and forth like this. So I can honestly take a good sword and rattle my saber a little bit like that. But if I want to, I can pull it out fairly smooth so it doesn't make that much noise at all. And when I bring it back in, it still stays a little bit more true to being well. Now, when I say being well is I'm able to push the habaki in here and get that nice click to it. If I bring it around this way and I put it into my belt now, just like this, triangled out, and I take it, I push it out. You notice that you can hardly hear it at all compared to the other one. And then when I bring it back in this way. Nice and smooth, easy to the point. Make sure when you pick up a sword, use them all the same, and if one feels loose or one feels really tight, go with it. But the more expensive the blade, the smoother the action.